Greetings, classicists, and welcome to Book 10 with Maymay. Say hello, Maymay. No, she's not interested. Anyway, so Book 10, Wind Gods and Witches. Let's get started. So, what I'd like to do is the Book 10 test, and of course, mark it yourself. Really, you should be getting a very minimum of 7, hopefully 8. And ideally 10. The questions are all things that really you need to know. If you're not getting those kind of scores in the tests, then think about reading and rereading and taking your own notes and maybe preparing your own Quizlets or Kahoots or flashcards or something along those lines to really ensure that you're remembering everything that you need to from the books. So, as we've talked about before, some of those 4 key things that we see throughout the Wanderings, and remember the Wanderings of books 9 through 12, which is all really a speech of Odysseus. There's a few little interludes when he speaks to the Phaeacians, but fundamentally it is a 4-book speech by Odysseus. And remember what sort of thing he's trying to do. He's trying to impress the Phaeacians. He's trying to get the Phaeacians to give him more Xenia. He's trying to increase his kleos. And again, think back to Richardson and this idea that nobody in the Odyssey is really telling the complete truth, and conversation is based on misdirection and lies and half-truths, and that makes the Odyssey fascinating, also confusing, and at certain points a bit strange. Now, again, as I've said before, I think going down the route that Odysseus is lying and making it all up is probably a bit too extreme and won't find any favour with the exam board. But depending on the question, do bear in mind the potential for manipulation. So what were those 4 themes? And there are more, of course, but these are 4 key ones that come up with the Wanderings. So Odysseus is a leader. So do think about this. Does Odysseus do the right thing by his men? Does he have good strategies? Does he look after his men? Is he responsible for his men? Is he more focused on his own well-being and his own status than that of his men? And is that reasonable? When you think about it from a Homeric hero's perspective, one could argue that's not as unreasonable as we might think. Fundamentally, followers are there to give you Time and Kleos. What else do we see in the Wanderings all the time? Well, Xenia and civilization. The Wanderings are arguably a real exploration of what it means to be different, what it means to be a barbarian, what happens when the normal rules of society are turned on their head, what happens if people don't stick to Xenia, what happens if women are in charge, what happens if women are sexually liberated. These are all things that are explored to a degree in the Wanderings. Another classic essay throughout the Odyssey, but where there's a lot of examples of it, is fate and free will. And an important dynamic to think about there is the difference between Odysseus and his men. So lots of things seem to be fated for Odysseus. He's fated to get home. He seems to be fated to defeat the suitors, although remember there's always a little element of debate about fate and its nature. The men, on the other hand, whether things are fated for them is a little bit murkier. Quite often we think that it's free will. The men in book 9 with the Cicones, they choose to stay on the beach and have their barbecue and their food, and then 6 out of every ship are killed. The men do seem to be acting out of free will as opposed to divine intervention. If you're considering free will, you could also consider the nature to which they're ordered to do things by Odysseus. But there you go. The other important thing that we see in the Wanderings all the time is the development of Odysseus's skills. So to what extent does he learn throughout the Wanderings the skills that he needs to defeat the suitors on Ithaca? So let's get straight into Book 10, line 14 to 55, the island of King Aeolus, a minor deity, the god of the winds. Now, when Odysseus, and remember this, Odysseus and his army rock up and ask Aeolus for Xenia, he grants them Xenia, and he feeds and entertains Odysseus' whole army, Odysseus and his 12 ships, for a month. Now that is pretty spectacular Xenia on this exotic and mystical island. Now, Odysseus is given exceptional Xenia in that he's given help with his onward journey. Aeolus puts all of the winds into a bag, and apart from one, which is the wind that blows Odysseus home. And then when Odysseus comes close to Ithaca, he sees the hearth fires, the smoke rising up. And remember, there's a lot of symbolism in that. That hearth is fundamentally the core of the family. Is it his own fires that he sees? Is it a fire that Penelope is sitting next to, waiting for Odysseus to come back? Maybe. It's entirely possible. But Odysseus then falls asleep, and his men who think that he's concealing treasure from them open the bag of winds, and they are blown back to Aeolus' island. Here, Aeolus refuses to give them Xenia a second time round, because rather interestingly, he says, you're cursed by the gods, and if you're cursed by the gods, Xenia doesn't apply. So an interesting point that Aeolus makes, and he refuses any further help and hospitality, and so they set off. So, an interesting story. Aeolus shows excellent Xenia and then withdraws Xenia and doesn't seem to be punished. That seems to be considered or accepted to be the right thing. Is it fate or free will that causes this disaster, this strange situation? It seems very much to be the free will of the men. They feel their teammate is not being recognised. They open the bag of winds thinking it's gold, and disaster ensues. So that seems to be pretty clear. Odysseus has failed as a leader. Should he have told his men what was in the bag? It seems to make sense. Say for God's sake, don't open the bag of winds, otherwise this will happen. But he doesn't trust them enough or view them as worthy enough. He also attempts to steer the boat for days on end without sleep, which seems to be a bit of a mistake too. Can we blame him? Should we blame him? Is it the benefit of hindsight? Anyway, some important issues from this little story of King Aeolus and the island of Aeolia. Now, we then get onto a short but really quite significant event or story, and that is the story of the Laestrygonians. And a couple of questions that I want you to consider. Is Odysseus at fault for the loss of 11 ships? Because in this scene, although it's short, it's quite transformative. Odysseus goes from the leader of a war band consisting of 12 ships, an army fundamentally, to being a fleeing, persecuted, terrified refugee. How civilized are the Laestrygonians? This is always a question that we need to consider. And the Laestrygonians are a little mixed, one might argue. So, let's first consider Odysseus as a leader. And we've always got to be a bit careful. Are we looking at him as a modern leader or a Homeric leader? Now, we can argue he wasn't a very good leader because, as he himself says, he suspected a trap when the 12 ships were sailing towards what seemed like a very sensible harbour. He stayed outside the harbour and his men went piling on in. And that again seems to suggest he's not really in control of his men. Think back to Ismarus, where he told his men, get on your ships and let's go, and they said no. And then he is sailing towards this harbour and he sort of pulls up and stops outside and they go piling on in. It seems that a lot of his men are not particularly under his firm control. As a counter argument, though, we do need to think about this. Are we expecting too much from a Homeric hero? They don't really have this concept of military discipline and order, and you must obey everyone's orders. You obey the hero's orders because he is richer than you, more powerful than you, stronger than you, not because there's a sort of formal hierarchy, a formal chain of command. So maybe we're judging him a little bit too harshly by modern military standards. Why else was Odysseus maybe not a good leader? Well, he fundamentally runs away at the end of this event. His men are being brutally butchered in the harbour, and Odysseus doesn't sort of carefully untie his boat, consider what he can do, and then slowly run away. He slashes through the cable and flees as fast as he possibly can. Is this something we can blame him for? Again, it's a difficult one. If his ships are surrounded by man-eating giants throwing boulders, can Odysseus actually do anything? Well, probably not. It's a harsh, practical decision, but perhaps it was the only one. On the other hand, he is a great hero. He is Odysseus. Surely he should at least try. Surely death is a better option than fleeing in front of these terrible monsters who are destroying your very army. Debated even at the time. On the other hand, he examined the area himself. When he arrives, he gets up on the headland and has a look round, sees if he can seize danger, and then sends out scouts and heralds. So he thinks, okay, we need to find out what's going on, and we need to appeal for Xenia and create that relationship that will keep us safe. So, he does try and do the things that he can, although he doesn't actually send himself on that final scouting mission. So, how good a leader is he? Well, debatable. What's Laestrygonian society like? Well, again, we see something quite similar to the island or the land of the Cyclops, rather. So they've got this excellent harbour, but it's unused. When Odysseus and his men pile in, there isn't a port, there aren't ships of the Laestrygonians there. It's fundamentally empty and natural. And that, again, hints at a lack of civilization of the Laestrygonians. There's no cultivated fields. Again, there isn't this idea of Themis, civilization, control over nature, order. Now, there are, of course, herds, so there's some kind of agriculture, but it isn't that control of the land. And fundamentally, perhaps the least civilized aspect of them all is that they're giant cannibals with no Xenia at all. So they eat people rather than provide food for people, and that's pretty damn uncivilized, as I'm sure you'll agree. Now, there are hints at a certain level of civilization, though. So they have a town, they have a settlement, and with a settlement there's the hint of rules and regulations, and they have a king, Antiphates. So there is hierarchy to a degree, and they seem to have an assembly place too, which hints at public debate and discussion and communication, which means kleos. So there's some element of civilization there. They also have wagons and timber, so there's a little bit of sort of techne, if you like. There is construction and craftsmanship that goes on. I would argue overall, though, this is not a civilized place. It is a strange place where Xenia doesn't really mean much. And remember, Xenia is what holds society together. Now, within the story of the Laestrygonians, there is an excellent simile where the Laestrygonians are described as attacking Odysseus' men in the harbour, throwing rocks at them, and then Homer says they carried them off like fishes on a spear. So stop and think, why is this simile so effective, given the context of a Homeric audience and the scene that is being described? Why is this such a good simile to use? Have a stop. Write down some ideas. Was that you sighing? Anyway. So, just a few thoughts. First of all, you're looking at something that is very familiar to a maritime or naval culture, this idea of fishing and spearfishing. So straight away, all of the audience know what's going on. They've been there, they've fished, they've killed fish, they've smelt the blood, they've harvested the fish. You're transferring them from a situation that they have never experienced, which is having huge rocks thrown at them by giant cannibals and enormous spears being used to gut and harvest men, to a situation that they're intimately familiar with. So the other reason why this works so well is that when we talk about carrying them off like fishes, the men themselves are being harvested for food. There's that sense of the men being animals captured and killed for food, which is again completely the opposite of the whole concept and purpose of Xenia, and that's really highlighted in this simile. It also demonstrates the sort of power dynamic, the difference in power. So it's not a fight. It's not struggling with a shark or a leopard or a cat or some ferocious predator that puts up a fight but is finally overcome. This is helpless fish being speared and carried off. This isn't a dangerous situation for the fishermen, nor is it a dangerous situation for the Lystragonians, because the imbalance of power is so significant. This also allows us to, or rather emphasizes the concept of numbers. So the multitude of men harvested en masse like fish are. You pull up a net of fish and they pour out onto the ground, and you stab and collect and all that sort of thing. Too numerous to count. So really, in one line, in one simile, Homer has done a huge amount of work for his Bronze Age audience and modern audience of informed classicists. So what I would like you to do now, if you have got time, is have a look at this video by Emily Hauser on women in Homer. It's probably best to come and do this at the end in case you run out of time, and as always, identify the arguments that Professor Howe, I think, is she a professor or doctor, that my good friend Emily, never met her sadly, makes. So have a watch of that at the end, perhaps, if appropriate. So we then get on to one of the most important characters in The Wandering, which is Circe. Now, she's an interesting character, but first of all, I want you to give this some thought. Why is Circe so terrifying to men? In a sense, she's terrifying to everyone, but especially why is she so terrifying to men? So stop the video and write down as many as you possibly can. Well done. I'm sure they were excellent. Now, this is my opinion. Other opinions are valid. Oh, no, yes. So first of all, she's very deceptive. She starts off with weaving and singing, which are the signs of a good woman. So she isn't out and out evil. She isn't an obvious threat like some of the terrifying creatures that Odysseus meets later on, Scylla and Charybdis. She has the appearance of being a good woman, and this is terrifying and dangerous and upsetting, because you then think, well, can I ever trust a woman who I see weaving or singing? Might they be some kind of Circe figure? As an expert in magic and drugs, she again has these powers that are unfightable. So obviously, if a woman attacks a man with a knife or something along those lines, then as a Homeric hero, there's a very, very good chance that they will overpower the woman. They will win that fight. It's probably not much of a contest in reality. They can use their strength and their warlike ability to win a victory, to control the situation. But what they cannot defend against is magic and drugs, the unseen poison, the unseen potion, the magic spell. And this is why Circe and women are so terrifying to men in the ancient world, because of this this darker power that they can't fight. Circe is also terrifying once more because of her corruption of Xenia, and Xenia is what holds society together. So again, it's not a hostile response to people seeking Xenia. She welcomes them in. She acknowledges and admits the Xenia relationship, and then turns them into animals. And that's the next issue. When they're turned into animals, they lose their desire to go home, and to a degree their identity. And remember, those are also carefully wrapped together. When you take away someone's ability to go home, their desire to go home, chunks of their memory, you stop them being who they are. And identity is the most important thing in this Homeric world. Circe also has a kind of role reversal of sexual desire and control. Although interestingly, in a sense, she's a little bit more about sexual equality rather than control, which in another way is probably just as terrifying for the Greeks. Circe is open and straightforward with her sexual desires. She doesn't require marriage. She doesn't require any kind of long-term commitment or anything much. She has sex because she enjoys it. Terrifying. So Odysseus has sent his man Eurylochus off to go and see what's going on once he has landed on Circe's island, and Eurylochus led a certain number of men out. These men were captured and suffered under Circe, turned into animals, etc., etc. Eurylochus races back, speaks to Odysseus, and Odysseus agrees, or well, Odysseus says that he is going to go and rescue the men by himself because it's such a terrifying situation. So again, good leadership on Odysseus' part, one might argue, going to rescue the men who've got themselves into trouble. Now, Eurylochus has pointed out to Odysseus that there is danger, that there is an issue, but Eurylochus isn't sure of the precise details. So if Odysseus wanders into Circe's palace to see Circe, it seems likely that it would not end well for Odysseus. Surely he would either be drugged or tapped with a magic wand, or not be able to outwit Circe. So it's a moment of great tension. If Odysseus falls to Circe's trap, then that's it for Odysseus's men. That's it for Odysseus. That's it for Penelope, for Telemachus. The whole thing would fall apart. And as a result, Hermes appears. As Odysseus is walking along, Hermes appears as a completely out of place young boy. So I'm sure Odysseus has got some kind of understanding of something not being quite right, and gives Odysseus all of the information that he needs to survive Circe. But why does Hermes intervene? Well, that's an interesting question. So Hermes tells Odysseus how to defeat Circe. He tells him about the drugs. He tells him about sex, that fundamentally if you have sex with Circe, that will come close to sealing the deal. But also he tells him about the power of oaths, and this is something that Odysseus later uses with Calypso. So Hermes is absolutely crucial. He gives him when I said drugs, I meant moly, the antidote to the drug. He tells Odysseus how to not quite manipulate Circe, but what she wants, sex, and the power of oaths, a power greater than Circe, that's supported by Zeus. So extremely important. Without that knowledge, would Odysseus have done things in that way? Probably not. Could he have done? Could he have spoken sweet words to Circe and charmed her into doing everything that he wanted? Well, maybe, but she's pretty cunning and pretty charming herself. So I think we can argue that Hermes' intervention is crucial. But why does Hermes intervene? Well, Hermes and the gods are often considered to be agents of fate. So when fate is going awry, they step in and set fate back on course. And we see that in previous situations. For example, when Odysseus is about to die on the raft, all the way back in Book 5, we get the interventions of Athene and a completely strange intervention from Ino, who appears for just a brief paragraph. Odysseus is about to die, she appears, makes sure he doesn't die, and then she disappears. And again, with Homer, you've got to be careful because fate isn't necessarily a clearly laid out philosophical sort of concept, but that is one of the ideas that academics have about the gods, is that they are agents of fate. They ensure that fate runs relatively smoothly. Now, is Zeus an agent of fate or in control of fate? That's something that's never clear in Homer. Another reason why Hermes may have helped Odysseus is that Hermes is a trickster like Odysseus. So Hermes is the god of thieves, tricksters, knaves, and Odysseus is the ultimate thief, trickster, and knave. So perhaps there's a little affinity with Hermes. Remember, Athene helps Odysseus because of his strategy and wisdom in warfare and in life. But he does go beyond that into this trickery, this deceit, and maybe that's why Hermes loves him too. So, on to the next bit, line 320 to 404. How does this scene characterize both Odysseus and Circe? So how does it show their essential natures? How does it build up our understanding of their characters? Stop the video and jot down as many ideas as you can. Good. Sorry. So how does it characterize them? Well, again, there are so many different ideas, but I think with regard to Circe, it emphasizes her passionate sexuality. So, she is a very sexual creature and keen on sex for pleasure. She's not thinking about sex with a husband for children or for his pleasure, although she seems happy to give pleasure to Odysseus. It is about her pleasure. And this is a strange and unusual situation to be in for a man like Odysseus. Although again, as I've said before, we do need to be a bit careful. Circe is female, but she is also immortal, and they do play by slightly different rules, one might argue. Circe and Xenia, well, this is a strange one. This is an interesting one because when it starts off, Circe has absolutely appalling Xenia. She seems to be turning the whole system on its head. However, when Odysseus tricks her and bests her, then arguably her Xenia is some of the best in the book. She treats Odysseus and his men to a sort of luxury existence for a year, and then gives him the help and support that he needs to go into the underworld, which gives him incredible amounts of kleos. It also gives him all of the information that he needs to survive and thrive back on Ithaca, and in a sense to get to Ithaca in the first place. So Circe's interventions are absolutely crucial, and they seem to be as a result of Xenia, or is that actually a misreading? Is Circe's hospitality not about Xenia at all, but actually due to her sort of passion and desire for Odysseus? So is she actually beyond a system of Xenia? Circe is certainly magical. She's got her magic wand and she's got her potions, and she's undeniably attracted to Odysseus. And this is a core facet of Odysseus's character. Pretty much all the women in the Odyssey are deeply, deeply attracted to Odysseus and relish the opportunity to help him out. I always say that Odysseus is a Bronze Age James Bond, and that's absolutely true. He does have many similar characteristics. Now, how does this passage characterize Odysseus? Well, rather interestingly, he is lacking urgency to get home. He stays and hangs around with Circe and sleeps with her for a year. And he doesn't even leave under his own steam. Well, no, he does leave under his own steam, but it's not actually his idea to leave, as we'll discover later. This passage also helps us understand Odysseus as a manipulator, as a cunning individual. So yes, he's been told by Hermes how to ensure his own individual safety, but it's Odysseus's manipulation of Circe that allows him to free his men. So he looks sad and deeply unhappy and sighing and sort of staring and generally being miserable. And Circe goes, "Oh, what's wrong?" And Odysseus says, "Oh, well, I can't possibly be happy without my men." So Circe turns them back. So again, we've got some significant manipulative skill on behalf of Odysseus. And again, it's with a woman. Think about the way he manipulated Arete. Think about the way he's manipulated Nausicaa. Could we argue he manipulates Athene? I don't know. Maybe not. So, when Odysseus is due to leave, there is quite a different departure scene to that of Calypso. And let's look at these two questions. How is Circe's approach to Odysseus' departure different to his departure from Calypso? And how desperate is Odysseus to get home at this point, and why might it be different when he leaves Calypso? So stop the video and have a think. Write down as many ideas as you possibly can. Good. Okay. Oh God, so I've done it again. How important are all of those things that Calypso does? Well, fundamentally, again, unbelievably important. There is no way Odysseus could get to the underworld to get the information he needs without Circe's very clear and explicit guidance in terms of how to get there, how to sacrifice, and who to speak to. So, it's absolutely crucial. Odysseus wouldn't have thought when leaving Circe's island, "Oh, I'm going to go to the underworld and see Tiresias for advice." So, a crucial piece of input from Circe. So, a quick paragraph, if you like, to finish. 2 questions. So 2 paragraphs, if not more. What would happen if you removed Circe from the Odyssey? An interesting question. How would that change our understanding of Odysseus? How would that change our understanding of women? How would that change our understanding of Xenia? What does the character and story of Circe do for us? And the next idea, and by all means do quite a long kind of column, 2-thinged column with Calypso and Circe. How is Circe different to Calypso? Think about almost every angle. Relationship with Odysseus, help with Odysseus' onward journey, Xenia, beauty, etc., etc., etc. So think of as many similarities and differences as possible. So that is a good couple of pages, I'm sure. Anyway, well done for that. That's a bit of a rapid run through, and that's why obviously you've got to be reading those books yourself, answering all those knowledge questions, and getting all that side of things on board so that these video lessons make sense and that we can go through them at pace. Good. Well done. That is the end of book 10, and I will see you next time for book 11. So take care. Mimi, any final words? No, none at all. Anyway, I will see you in the next lesson.